October 2023. A Colorado woman starts receiving disturbing text messages from someone claiming to be her ex-boyfriend from over 20 years ago. The messages are friendly at first, then they turn sexual, then threatening. She's terrified. She goes to police. She documents everything in a detailed spreadsheet. She installs security cameras. She tells her family, "I think he's going to kill me." 2 months later, she's found dead in her garage, beaten, stabbed in the heart. And the investigation reveals something that nobody saw coming. The stalker who terrorized her for months, who knew intimate details about her life, who threatened to kill her and her family, wasn't her ex-boyfriend at all. It was her husband, the man she'd been married to for 16 years, the father of her 3 children. The person she trusted to protect her from the stalker was the stalker, and he'd been planning to kill her the entire time. This is the story of Daniel Krug, and the man who destroyed her life while pretending to save it. Before we dive into one of the most twisted murder cases in recent memory, if you want to stay updated on cases like this where nothing is what it seems, where the investigation uncovers layers of deception, and where digital forensics solve the crime, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this case has everything. A complex murder plot, months of psychological manipulation, a husband playing the role of concerned protector while secretly being the threat, and a digital trail that ultimately exposed the truth. Drop a comment right now. Have you heard about the Daniel Krug case? Because this one went viral after 48 hours and 2020 covered it, and the details are absolutely chilling. Content warning before we begin. This video discusses domestic violence, stalking, and murder. We discuss the psychological manipulation of victims and the tactics used by abusers to maintain control. If you're in an unsafe relationship, resources are available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. If you're in immediate danger, call 911. This case is presented to help people understand how domestic violence can escalate and how abusers use manipulation and deception as weapons. Let's start with who Daniel Krug was, because she deserves to be remembered as more than a victim. Kristil was 43 years old in 2023. She lived in Broomfield, Colorado, a suburb of Denver in the Anthem neighborhood. Broomfield is a planned community, the kind of place with good schools, safe streets, and families who know their neighbors. It's about 20 miles northwest of Denver, population around 75,000, not the kind of place where you expect brutal murders to happen. Kristil was a biochemical engineer. She worked in a technical field that required intelligence, precision, and problem-solving skills. People who knew her described her as smart, capable, and strong-willed. She wasn't someone who could be easily manipulated or controlled, which makes what happened to her even more disturbing, because the person who victimized her knew her intimately, knew her strengths and her vulnerabilities, and used that knowledge against her. Kristil and her husband Daniel had been married for 16 years. They married in 2007. They had 3 children together, all young at the time of her death. From the outside, they looked like a typical suburban family. 2 working parents, kids in school, a house in a nice neighborhood. But behind closed doors, the marriage was falling apart. And Daniel Krug was not handling it well. Daniel Krug was 43 years old, same age as Kristil. He worked as a financial analyst for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Stable job, good salary. On paper, he was a responsible professional and family man. But according to prosecutors and evidence that would emerge during the investigation, Daniel was controlling, manipulative, and increasingly desperate as he felt his marriage slipping away. Now, to understand the stalking that preceded Kristil's murder, we need to go back in time. Back to when Kristil was young, before she met Daniel. In the summer before college, Kristil dated a young man named Jack Anthony Holland. They were together for a little over a year, according to a timeline Kristil later provided to police. It was a teenage relationship, first love kind of thing. They broke up when they went to different colleges, and Kristil moved on with her life. Over the years, according to what Kristil told police, Jack Anthony Holland would occasionally reach out to her, messages suggesting he wanted to reconnect or possibly get back together. Kristil would typically not respond, and the messages would stop. It was sporadic, it wasn't threatening, just an ex who apparently hadn't fully moved on. Kristil didn't think much of it. It was annoying, but not alarming. Until October 2023, when everything changed. On October 2nd, 2023, Kristil received a text message. The message said, "Hope it's okay, I looked you up. I go to Boulder every few weeks and thought we could hook up. You game?" The message was signed by someone identifying himself as Anthony, an apparent reference to Jack Anthony Holland, the ex-boyfriend from over 20 years ago. Kristil didn't respond. She was married. She had kids. She had no interest in hooking up with an ex from 2 decades ago. The next day, October 3rd, more messages came, multiple texts. The tone shifted. The sender became more insistent, more sexual, and then more hostile when Kristil didn't respond. According to police reports, the messages escalated quickly from attempted reconnection to explicit sexual propositions to veiled threats. And here's what made it terrifying. The sender knew details about Kristil's life, details that suggested he was watching her. The stalker mentioned that the registration stickers on Kristil's license plates were expired. How would someone know that unless they'd been close enough to her car to see it? The stalker mentioned that Kristil had been to the dentist recently. How would someone know her schedule? The implication was clear. This person was watching her, following her, keeping track of her movements. And that realization was absolutely terrifying. Kristil was scared. She told her family about the messages. She told her parents, Lars and Linda Grimsrud. She told her siblings, Jenna Erickson and Josh Adamson, and they all became concerned. This didn't sound like harmless messages from an ex. This sounded like stalking. This sounded dangerous. On October 31st, 2023, Kristil made her first police report. She went to the Broomfield Police Department and spoke with Sergeant Andrew Martinez. She brought with her something remarkable, a detailed spreadsheet documenting every single interaction with the stalker, every text message, every email, the dates, the times, the content. Kristil was an engineer. She approached this problem methodically. She was creating a record, building evidence, doing everything right. Sergeant Martinez opened a stalking investigation. Police body cam footage from November 2023 shows Kristil sitting with Martinez, going through her documentation. She's visibly shaken. She's afraid. She tells Martinez about the ex-boyfriend from 20 years ago who she thinks is now stalking her. She refers to him as Kickman because the email address he was using was ahollandkicks@gmail.com. She explains that the messages have become increasingly threatening, that she's worried for her safety and her family's safety. Martinez takes the case seriously. He begins investigating. But here's the problem. Investigating cyberstalking and harassment is complex. It requires subpoenas for email providers, phone companies, internet service providers. It requires tracking IP addresses and tracing burner phones. And all of that takes time. Time that in retrospect, Kristil didn't have. Throughout October and November, the stalking continued. The messages kept coming, and they became more and more menacing. The stalker was sending threats not just to Kristil, but also suggesting he was watching Daniel, creating the impression that both of them were being targeted. And here's the insidious part of Daniel's plan. By making it seem like he was also being stalked, he positioned himself as a fellow victim, as Kristil's protector, as the person she should turn to for safety. Kristil's family watched her deteriorate under the psychological pressure. Her mother Linda said Kristil was just in tears constantly. Her father Lars said she was terrified. Her sister Jenna said Kristil expressed the fear that this man is going to kill me. Think about that for a moment. Kristil knew she was in danger. She told people she thought she was going to be killed, and she was right. But she thought the danger was coming from an ex-boyfriend in another state. She never suspected that the real threat was sleeping next to her every night. By early December, Kristil's marriage to Daniel was, in the words of prosecutors, all but over. They were still living in the same house, but the relationship was functionally done. Kristil had reportedly begun the process of separating from Daniel. She was planning to leave, and Daniel knew it. And according to the prosecution's theory of the case, this is what transformed the stalking from a manipulation tactic into a precursor to murder. You see, prosecutors believe that Daniel created the stalking campaign for a specific purpose, to drive Kristil closer to him, to make her dependent on him for protection, to position himself as her hero against an external threat. Classic abuser tactic: create a problem, then present yourself as the solution. But it wasn't working. Despite months of terrorizing messages, despite the fear and stress it caused, Kristil was still pulling away from Daniel. She was still planning to leave. The manipulation wasn't achieving its goal. And then, in early December, something critical happened. Kristil started to suspect that her husband might be behind the stalking. According to Daniel's own statement to police, Kristil confronted him. She said to his face, "I can't rule you out as the stalker." She asked him directly if he was behind the messages, and Daniel denied it. He looked his wife in the eye and lied. But Kristil's suspicion meant that Daniel was running out of time. She was putting the pieces together. If she figured it out completely, If she went to police with her suspicions, the digital investigation would focus on Daniel, and he would be caught. So Daniel made a decision. If he couldn't control Kristil, if he couldn't manipulate her into staying, then he would kill her. December 14th, 2023, Thursday morning, a cold December day in Colorado, just 11 days before Christmas. Kristil's 3 children had school. That morning, Kristil got the kids ready, made breakfast, packed lunches, all the normal morning routines of a parent. Around 7:30 a.m., she drove them to school or to the bus stop. The children said goodbye to their mother. They had no idea it would be the last time they'd ever see her alive. After dropping off the kids, Kristil drove home. She arrived back at the house on Promontory Loop shortly before 8:00 a.m. The house was quiet, or so she thought. What Kristil didn't know was that Daniel hadn't left for work. On a normal day, Daniel would leave the house around 7:50 or 8:00 a.m. to commute to his job in Glendale. But this morning, he was still there. He was waiting for her, hiding in the garage, armed with a blunt object and a knife, ready to execute the plan he'd been formulating. As Kristil entered the garage, Daniel attacked. He ambushed her from behind. She never saw it coming. He struck her in the head multiple times with a blunt object, likely a hammer or similar weapon. The blows to her head were devastating. Kristil collapsed. She was likely unconscious or disoriented from the head trauma. And then Daniel stabbed her. One fatal stab wound directly to her heart. The medical examiner would later determine that the stab wound to the chest was the cause of death. The heart wound caused massive internal bleeding that killed her within minutes. Daniel Krug died in her garage, murdered by the man she'd spent 16 years of her life with, the father of her children, the person who was supposed to protect her from the stalker that he himself had created. The brutality of the murder tells you something about Daniel's state of mind. This wasn't a crime of passion in the heat of an argument. This was planned. This was an ambush. This was execution. He waited for her. He positioned himself. He attacked from behind when she was most vulnerable. And he used overwhelming force to ensure she couldn't fight back or escape. After killing Kristil, Daniel immediately began his cover-up. And this is where the premeditation becomes absolutely undeniable. Because Daniel didn't just kill his wife and flee. He stayed in the house for approximately 30 minutes, staging the scene and creating a false narrative that would point investigators away from him and toward the imaginary stalker. At 8:15 a.m., Daniel used Kristil's phone to disable the home security system. The family had a smart home setup with cameras and an alarm system. Daniel knew he needed to turn it off to hide what he'd done. He also took blue masking tape from a kitchen drawer and covered the doorbell camera. 3 other surveillance cameras in the house mysteriously weren't recording when police later arrived. Daniel had systematically disabled the very security measures that Kristil's family had installed to protect her from the stalker. Then Daniel did something remarkably calculated. Using Kristil's phone, he composed text messages and scheduled them to be sent later that morning. One message was to Kristil's brother. Another was to Detective Martinez, the Broomfield police detective investigating the stalking case. The messages were designed to suggest that Kristil was having an affair, that she was alive after Daniel left for work, and that her death might be related to some secret relationship rather than to her husband. The messages were carefully crafted lies, scheduled to send automatically while Daniel was at work, creating what he thought was a perfect alibi. The last actual activity on Kristil's phone was at 8:22 a.m. After that, the phone wasn't used by a living person. It was used by Daniel to send scheduled messages and to create the illusion that Kristil was still alive. Digital forensics would later prove that the messages sent at 8:56 a.m. couldn't have been sent by Kristil because the phone showed no actual user activity after 8:22 a.m. The timing and the metadata exposed Daniel's deception. At 8:24 a.m., surveillance cameras from a neighbor's house captured Daniel's car leaving the Krug residence. This is important. Daniel's normal departure time was around 7:50 or 8:00 a.m., but on December 14th, he left at 8:24 a.m., approximately 30 minutes later than usual. Those 30 minutes were spent murdering his wife and staging the scene. Before leaving the neighborhood, Daniel did something else that demonstrated consciousness of guilt. He deactivated his car's dash cam. Daniel's vehicle had a dashboard camera that recorded while he was driving. On December 14th, he turned it off. Why? Because he didn't want any record of his behavior that morning. He didn't want footage of himself leaving the house late, potentially looking stressed or suspicious. The fact that he thought to disable the dashcam shows how carefully he was thinking about covering his tracks. Daniel stopped for coffee on his way to work. This is classic behavior for someone committing a planned crime. Act normal. establish routine, be seen by witnesses doing ordinary things. He wanted people to remember that he seemed fine, that nothing appeared out of the ordinary. He arrived at his workplace, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment in Glendale, at 9:27 a.m., almost an hour later than his usual arrival time, but not so late that it would raise immediate red flags. At 8:56 a.m., while Daniel was presumably driving to work or getting coffee, the scheduled text messages from Kristil's phone were sent. Daniel received them. He could now tell police that his wife was texting him after he left the house, which would establish that she was alive when he departed. It was a clever plan, but it was a plan built on lies that digital forensics would eventually unravel. Throughout the morning, Daniel acted like a normal person at work. He did his job. He interacted with colleagues. He sent a few text messages and made a few phone calls to Kristil around noon, none of which received responses. And then, at approximately 12:15 p.m., Daniel called the Broomfield Police Department non-emergency line. The call was recorded, and Daniel's performance on that call is chilling when you know what he'd done. Daniel told the dispatcher, "I don't think this is an emergency, but this feels really weird. My wife isn't responding to text messages or phone calls." He sounded concerned, but not panicked. Worried, but not hysterical. He explained about the stalking situation. He said he was concerned that something might have happened. He requested a welfare check. Could an officer go to his house and make sure his wife was okay? The dispatcher agreed to send an officer. Daniel had just requested that police discover the body of the woman he'd murdered hours earlier. This level of deception, this ability to call police and play the concerned husband, requires a profound level of sociopathy. This is a man who beat his wife's head in, stabbed her in the heart, staged an elaborate cover-up, went to work, and then calmly called police pretending to be worried about her safety. At 12:28 p.m., officers from the Broomfield Police Department arrived at the Krug residence. They knocked on the door. No answer. They checked the perimeter. They looked in windows, and then they entered the garage. What they found was Kristil Krug's body. She was lying in the garage, deceased. There were obvious signs of trauma. Head wounds, a stab wound to the chest, blood. The officers immediately secured the scene and called for detectives and forensic teams. Daniel was notified at work that police had found his wife and that she appeared to be deceased. A victim advocate from the Broomfield Police Department, Heather Ates, drove to Daniel's workplace to pick him up and transport him to the police station. The drive was recorded on Ates' body camera, and the footage is disturbing because it shows Daniel's performance as a grieving husband. In the car, according to Ates' later testimony, Daniel was crouched over to the side of the passenger door. He was making sounds consistent with crying. Ates was rubbing his back, trying to comfort him. She would later say that Daniel was very adamant about wanting to be the one to tell his children what had happened to their mother. He kept repeating that he needed to tell the kids. He wanted to be the one. This obsession with controlling the narrative, with being the one to shape how the children understood their mother's death, is consistent with Daniel's need for control throughout this entire case. When they arrived at the police station, Daniel was taken to an interview room. His 3 children were at the station, brought there by family members. They were in a hallway, unaware that their mother was dead, and Daniel insisted on being the one to tell them. Police body camera captured the moment. Daniel, with a victim advocate present, telling his children that their mother was gone. The children's reactions were heartbreaking, and Daniel, the man who had caused this devastation, was playing the role of the comforting father. After the notification to the children, detectives interviewed Daniel. He was emotional. He cried. He expressed confusion and shock. He told detectives his theory of the crime. He said, "In my brain, the story that I have is someone came to the door. Maybe she went outside to get a package and they must have come in. And she's a fighter. She is strong. She would have fought." Daniel's theory was that the stalker, the ex-boyfriend he had been impersonating for months, had come to the house and killed Kristil. He painted a picture of Kristil as someone who would have fought back against an attacker, which was both true and a way to deflect suspicion from himself. After all, how could he, her husband, have overpowered her? She would have fought him, right? But the reality was that she never had a chance to fight. She was ambushed from behind. She was struck in the head before she could react. And the person who knew her well enough to know how and when she'd be most vulnerable was her husband. Detectives listened to Daniel's story. They were sympathetic at first. They were treating him as a grieving spouse and a potential witness. But they were also experienced investigators. And they knew that in domestic homicides, the spouse is always a suspect until they can be ruled out. They noticed details, they asked questions, and they began the process of building a timeline and gathering evidence. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy on Kristil's body. The findings were consistent with what officers observed at the scene. Kristil had suffered at least 2 significant blows to her head from a blunt object, causing skull fractures and brain trauma. She also had a stab wound to her chest that penetrated her heart. The stab wound was the fatal injury. The cause of death was listed as a stab wound to the chest with cardiac perforation. The manner of death was homicide. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't suicide. This was murder. While the medical examiner was working on the autopsy, detectives were working on the digital investigation. Remember, for 2 months, Sergeant Martinez had been investigating the stalking of Daniel Krug. He'd been trying to identify who was behind the threatening messages. He'd submitted subpoenas and warrants to email providers and phone companies, trying to trace the origin of the communications. And now, with Kristil dead, that investigation took on new urgency. The first major break came from examining the IP addresses associated with the stalker's email account. An IP address is like a digital fingerprint. It identifies the network and location from which internet activity originates. When investigators finally received responses to their subpoenas, they discovered something shocking. Some of the emails sent to Kristil, emails that were supposed to be from her ex-boyfriend stalking her from another state, had actually originated from an IP address registered to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Daniel Krug's workplace. Think about the implications of this. The stalker wasn't some obsessed ex-boyfriend. The stalker was logging into the email account from Daniel's own office, during working hours, using his employer's network. The person terrorizing Kristil was sitting in a state government building in Glenwood, pretending to work, while crafting threatening messages to his own wife. Detectives dug deeper into the digital evidence. The stalker had also been using burner phones to send text messages. Burner phones are prepaid cell phones that can be purchased with cash and used anonymously. They're popular with criminals because they're hard to trace. But investigators found the purchase records. One of the burner phones used to text Kristil had been purchased with a prepaid gift card, and that gift card was registered to Daniel Krug. Even more damning, cell phone tower data showed that the burner phone and Daniel's personal cell phone were often in the same locations at the same times. When Daniel was at work, both phones were pinging towers near his workplace. When Daniel was at home, both phones were pinging towers near his house. When Daniel traveled, both phones traveled with him. The only logical explanation was that Daniel was in possession of both phones. He was carrying the burner phone and using it to send stalking messages to his own wife. Investigators also examined the photographs that the stalker had sent. Some of the threatening messages included photos that were supposed to show the stalker watching Daniel, creating the illusion that this obsessed ex-boyfriend was surveilling the Krug family. But forensic analysis of those photographs revealed that they were selfies. Daniel Krug had photographed himself and sent those photos from the stalker's accounts to create the appearance that he was also being watched. It was an incredibly elaborate deception. Daniel was both the perpetrator and the supposed victim of the stalking. He was terrorizing his own family and then playing the role of the fellow victim. The digital forensics team also examined Kristil's phone in detail. They recovered the scheduled messages that Daniel had set up. They were able to see that the messages sent at 8:56 a.m. had been composed and scheduled earlier, during the time frame when Kristil would have been in the garage, either fighting for her life or already dead. The forensics showed that there was no actual user activity on the phone after 8:22 a.m. The screen wasn't touched, no apps were opened, no typing occurred. The only activity was the automated sending of the pre-scheduled messages. This proved that Kristil couldn't have sent those messages. She was already dead. Detectives also examined the surveillance systems. The home had multiple cameras, installed by Kristil's mother specifically because of the stalking situation. But on the morning of December 14th, 3 of those cameras weren't recording. Only the garage camera had footage, and that camera had been covered with tape shortly after Kristil was killed. The tape was blue masking tape. Investigators found that same type of tape in a kitchen drawer in the Krug house. Daniel had taken tape from his own kitchen to cover the camera. And here's another detail. Forensic examination of that tape found DNA. But it wasn't just Daniel's DNA or Kristil's DNA. There was also DNA from an unknown male. This would become a key point for the defense, suggesting that someone else was present. But prosecutors would argue that the unknown DNA could have come from anyone who had handled that tape at any prior time, and that it didn't outweigh the mountain of evidence against Daniel. Investigators also looked at Daniel's vehicle. They searched his car thoroughly. They were looking for blood, DNA, weapons, anything that would physically link Daniel to the murder. And this is where the case had a potential weakness. They didn't find blood in Daniel's car. They didn't find bloody clothes. They didn't find the murder weapon. Daniel's daughter had told investigators that her father was wearing the same clothes when he drove her to the bus stop that morning as he wore later in the day, implying he hadn't changed clothes. If he'd beaten and stabbed his wife, where was the blood? The defense would later argue that the absence of physical evidence was exculpatory. How could Daniel have committed such a violent crime and left no forensic trace? No blood in his car, no blood on his clothes, no DNA at the murder scene that matched him. In fact, they pointed out, there was partial DNA from an unknown male found on Kristil's neck. Didn't that suggest someone else killed her? Prosecutors had an answer to this. Daniel lived in that house. His DNA would be expected to be present in many locations. The absence of his DNA at a specific spot on her neck wasn't evidence of innocence. Moreover, the crime occurred in his own garage. He had access to cleaning supplies, to changes of clothes, to garbage disposal. He had 30 minutes after killing her to clean himself up before leaving for work. And the digital evidence was so overwhelming that it didn't matter whether they found blood in his car. They had proof he was the stalker. They had proof he lied about the messages. They had proof he staged the scene. And he was the only person with motive, means, and opportunity. Another critical aspect of the investigation was verifying that the real Jack Anthony Holland had nothing to do with this. Detectives tracked him down. He was living in Utah, about 8 hours away from Broomfield. They interviewed him. They verified his whereabouts on December 14th. He had a solid alibi. He was at home in Utah when Kristil was murdered. He hadn't been in Colorado. He had no idea Kristil was being stalked. He had no idea she'd been killed. He was an innocent man whose identity had been stolen by Daniel Krug to create a fake stalker. On December 16, 2023, 2 days after Kristil's murder, Daniel Krug was arrested. He was taken into custody at a King Soopers grocery store. He was charged with first-degree murder after deliberation, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation. The charges laid out the prosecution's theory that Daniel had stalked his own wife for months by impersonating her ex-boyfriend, and when that manipulation failed to prevent her from leaving him, he murdered her in a premeditated, calculated attack. The case number was 2023 CR 000581, filed in Broomfield County District Court. Daniel's first court appearance was on December 21, 2023. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. He was held without bond, deemed a danger to the community, and a flight risk. And the case began its path through the legal system toward trial. The prosecution was handled by the 17th Judicial District Attorney's Office, which covers Adams and Broomfield counties. District Attorney Brian Mason personally weighed in on the case, calling it an example of depravity and manipulation. The lead prosecutors were Chief Deputy District Attorney Stephanie Fritz and Senior Deputy District Attorney Kate Armstrong. These are experienced prosecutors who specialize in violent crimes and domestic violence cases. They began building their case for trial. The defense was led by attorney Joe Morales. Morales faced an uphill battle. The evidence against his client was extensive, but his job was to create reasonable doubt, to find weaknesses in the prosecution's case, to offer alternative explanations for the evidence, and to hold the state to its burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The case attracted significant media attention. Local news in Colorado covered it extensively. The story of a husband impersonating a stalker to terrorize his own wife before murdering her was shocking and unusual. As more details emerged, national media took notice. This was the kind of case that true crime audiences find compelling. A complex plot, a sympathetic victim, digital forensics, and a twist that nobody saw coming. The trial was scheduled for April 2025, more than a year after Kristil's death. Delays are common in murder cases. Both sides need time to review evidence, interview witnesses, file motions, and prepare their strategies. For Kristil's family, that year of waiting was agonizing. They had lost Kristil, they were raising her children, and they were waiting for justice. In April 2025, the trial began in Broomfield County District Court. Judge Terry Vasquez presided. Jury selection took several days. Finding 12 impartial jurors in a case that had received so much local media coverage was challenging. But eventually, a jury was seated, and the trial commenced. Opening statements began on a Friday. Senior Deputy District Attorney Kate Armstrong laid out the prosecution's case for the jury. She told them about the months of stalking. She explained how Daniel created a fictional stalker and used that fiction to terrorize his wife. She described how Kristil started putting the pieces together in the final days of her life, how she confronted Daniel, how she told him she couldn't rule him out as the stalker. And Armstrong explained why that realization sealed Kristil's fate. Armstrong told jurors she was putting the pieces together and he was running out of time. She described the morning of December 14th, how Daniel waited in the garage, how he ambushed Kristil from behind, how he struck her head repeatedly and then stabbed her in the heart. Armstrong said, he decided he was going to play puppet master by impersonating Jack Anthony Holland, stalking and terrorizing his family for months before murdering Kristil, 11 days before Christmas. The prosecution's case was built on the digital evidence. Armstrong walked the jury through the IP addresses, the burner phone records, the cell tower data, the forensic analysis of Kristil's phone showing the scheduled messages, the photographs Daniel took of himself to send as the stalker. She showed them the timeline. Daniel leaving the house 30 minutes late, the security system being disabled, the messages being sent after Kristil was already dead. She argued that the evidence was conclusive and that there was no reasonable doubt about who killed Daniel Krug. Defense attorney Joe Morales took a different approach. He acknowledged that the case was tragic and emotional, but he argued that emotion shouldn't replace evidence, and he challenged the quality of the investigation. Morales told jurors that there was no physical evidence linking Daniel to the murder. No blood in his car, no blood on his clothes, no murder weapon recovered, no DNA from Daniel at the scene. In fact, Morales pointed out, there was DNA from an unknown male found on Kristil's neck. Didn't that suggest someone else killed her? Morales also attacked the police investigation. He called the detective who investigated the stalking lazy and incompetent. He argued that if police had moved faster with their subpoenas, if they'd identified Daniel as the stalker earlier, Kristil might still be alive. He suggested that the Broomfield Police Department had failed to protect Kristil, and now they were trying to cover for their failures by rushing to pin the murder on Daniel. Morales pointed out that police hadn't fingerprinted Kristil's phone. If they alleged that Daniel sent texts from her phone after killing her, why didn't they test the phone for his fingerprints? Morales suggested this was sloppy work. He also noted that the tape covering the garage camera had DNA from an unknown person. Who was that person? Could that be the real killer? Morales urged the jury to serve as a barrier against an unjust conviction. He asked them to hold the prosecution to its burden of proof, and he emphasized that his client was presumed innocent and that the state had to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial lasted several weeks. The prosecution called dozens of witnesses. They called Kristil's family members, who testified about her fear in the months before her death. Her father, Lars Grimsrud, testified about how terrified Kristil had been. Her mother, Linda, testified about installing the security cameras. Her sister, Jenna Erickson, testified that Kristil had said she thought the stalker was going to kill her. Prosecutors called Sergeant Andrew Martinez, the detective who investigated the stalking. He walked the jury through Kristil's reports, her spreadsheet documenting the stalker's messages, his own efforts to trace the communications. Prosecutors called digital forensic experts who explained the IP address evidence, the cell tower data, the analysis of Kristil's phone. They called the medical examiner who performed the autopsy and explained Kristil's injuries and cause of death. Prosecutors also played the recording of Daniel's call to police requesting the welfare check. They played portions of his interview with detectives. They showed the jury body camera footage of Daniel being comforted by the victim advocate, of him insisting on telling his children. And they argued that all of this was performance, that Daniel was acting the part of the grieving husband while knowing exactly what he'd done. The defense called witnesses to challenge the investigation and to suggest alternative explanations. They called experts to discuss the DNA evidence and to argue that the unknown male DNA on Kristil's neck was significant. They tried to create doubt about whether Daniel could have committed such a violent crime without leaving more physical evidence behind. One question that hung over the trial was whether Daniel would testify in his own defense. Defendants have a constitutional right not to testify, and juries are instructed not to hold that against them. But jurors are human. They wonder what the defendant would say if he took the stand. In this case, Daniel did not testify. His attorneys decided that the risk of cross-examination was too great. Putting Daniel on the stand would allow prosecutors to question him about the stalking, the lies, the staged evidence. It was safer to rely on the presumption of innocence and to argue that the state hadn't proven its case. After weeks of testimony, the trial moved to closing arguments. Prosecutors argued that the evidence was overwhelming and that no reasonable person could doubt Daniel's guilt. They reminded jurors of the digital trail, the timeline, the staged messages, the disabled security cameras. They asked jurors to deliver justice for Kristil and her family. The defense argued that the state had failed to meet its burden of proof. They emphasized the lack of physical evidence and the presence of unknown DNA. They urged jurors not to convict based on emotion or suspicion, but only if they were certain beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated. We don't know exactly how long or what discussions occurred in the jury room, but eventually, they reached a verdict. On April 17, 2025, the jury returned to the courtroom. Daniel Krug was brought in. The judge asked if the jury had reached verdicts. The foreperson said yes, and the verdicts were read. Guilty of first-degree murder after deliberation. Guilty of 2 counts of stalking. Guilty of criminal impersonation. On every charge, the jury found Daniel Krug guilty. The evidence had convinced them. The digital trail was too strong. The timeline was too clear. The lies were too obvious. Daniel Krug had murdered his wife after months of stalking her while pretending to be someone else. Kristil's family members in the courtroom were emotional. Some cried with relief. Others sat in stunned silence. For them, the verdict was justice, but it couldn't bring Kristil back. It couldn't undo the trauma to her children. It couldn't repair the devastation that Daniel had caused. Sentencing occurred shortly after the verdict. In Colorado, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Terry Vasquez imposed that sentence on Daniel Krug. Additionally, for the stalking and impersonation charges, she imposed an additional 9.5 years to run consecutively. Daniel Krug would spend the rest of his life in prison. He would never be released. District Attorney Brian Mason spoke to the media after sentencing. He said, "This was a brutal, calculated murder, preceded by months of manipulation, emotional abuse, and deception. In planning and executing this horrific crime, Daniel Krug terrorized his wife, his children, and an innocent man, all in order to control and then murder a woman who no longer wanted to be with him." Broomfield Police Chief Anaya Hempelman also spoke, praising the work of investigators and saying that while the verdict couldn't bring Kristil back, he hoped it would close a painful chapter for her family. Daniel Krug is currently incarcerated at Sterling Correctional Facility in northeastern Colorado. He will remain there for the rest of his life. His children, who lost their mother to violence and their father to prison, are being raised by family members. The trauma they've experienced is unimaginable, and the road ahead for them is long and difficult. In December 2025, Judge Vasquez held a restitution hearing. Prosecutors asked that Daniel be required to pay ongoing restitution to Kristil's family. This includes costs for Kristil's burial, therapy for the children, and storage costs for Kristil's belongings, which are being kept for the children until they're older. Daniel's attorney objected to open-ended restitution, but Judge Vasquez indicated she would order Daniel to pay, with a future hearing scheduled to determine the exact scope and amount. This case has been covered extensively by national media. In September 2025, ABC's 2020 aired an episode titled "He's Right Behind You," which provided a detailed look at the case. In December 2025, CBS's 48 Hours aired an episode that included interviews with Kristil's family and investigators. Dateline NBC also covered the case, with Kristil's cousin Rebecca Ivanoff speaking about the need for faster responses to subpoenas in stalking cases. Ivanoff made an important point in her interviews. She said that if communications companies had responded faster to police subpoenas requesting information about the stalker's accounts, investigators might have identified Daniel as the culprit before he murdered Kristil. The subpoenas took weeks to be fulfilled, and by the time the information came back, Kristil was already dead. Ivanoff has called on lawmakers to require companies to respond to stalking-related subpoenas within 48 hours, arguing that delayed responses can cost lives. This case teaches us several important lessons about domestic violence, stalking, and the ways abusers use technology to control and harm their victims. First, it shows that stalking is often a precursor to violence. According to research, a significant percentage of domestic violence homicides are preceded by stalking behavior. When someone is being stalked by a current or former partner, the risk of lethal violence is elevated. Kristil knew she was being stalked and took appropriate steps. She reported it to police. She documented everything. She installed security cameras. But the stalker was inside her house, and that made her efforts to protect herself tragically ineffective. Second, this case demonstrates how abusers use psychological manipulation as a form of control. Daniel didn't just physically attack Kristil on December 14th. He spent months psychologically tormenting her, making her afraid, making her feel hunted, causing her immense stress and anxiety. This psychological abuse was a weapon, and it's a reminder that domestic violence isn't just physical, it's emotional, it's psychological. It's any behavior designed to control, intimidate, or harm another person. Third, this case highlights the importance of digital forensics in modern criminal investigations. 20 years ago, this case might have been unsolvable, but in 2024, almost everything leaves a digital trail. IP addresses, cell tower pings, scheduled messages, forensic analysis of phones and computers. All of these tools allowed investigators to prove what Daniel had done. And it's a reminder that criminals who think they can hide behind technology often underestimate the capabilities of modern forensic science. Fourth, this case shows the danger of underestimating the threat of domestic violence. From the outside, the Krugs looked like a normal suburban family, but behind closed doors, Daniel was controlling and manipulative. When Kristil tried to leave, he escalated to murder. Statistics show that the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is when they're leaving or have just left the relationship. That's when abusers feel they're losing control, and that's when violence often occurs. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. They provide confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can help you create a safety plan, find resources in your area, and connect you with local services. If you're being stalked, document everything just like Kristil did, report it to police and take it seriously. Stalking is a crime, and it's often a warning sign of escalating danger. Kristil Krug deserved better. She deserved to live. She deserved to see her children grow up. She deserved to be free from the man who terrorized and ultimately killed her. Her story is a tragedy, but it's also a reminder that domestic violence is pervasive, that abusers can be anyone, and that we all have a responsibility to recognize warning signs and support victims. The man who killed Kristil will spend the rest of his life in prison. That's justice in the legal sense. But for Kristil's children, for her parents, for her siblings, for everyone who loved her, the pain of her loss will never fully go away. All we can do is remember her, tell her story, and work to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Rest in peace, Kristil Krug. Your life mattered. Your story will not be forgotten.
Broomfield police! You go one way, I got the other. Another one on the left. The RP said there was a stalker.
On December 14th, 2023, the Broomfield police do a welfare check at this house, where Kristil Krug lives with her husband Dan and their 3 loving children. The footage you're about to see was filmed just minutes after Kristil's family life took a disturbing turn for the worse. 1 month earlier, Kristil walks into the Broomfield Police Department claiming that her crazy ex-boyfriend has been stalking her.
It's a lot, and it has definitely made me paranoid everywhere I go, unfortunately.
Detectives send units to follow Kristil around, and her husband installs security cameras on their property. The problem is, police have been unable to track down the suspect, and the stalking doesn't stop.
Now it's escalating. This is not just threats against me, it's threats against my husband.
On December 14th at 8:56 a.m., Kristil sends this text message to her husband. She is never heard from after that.
Broomfield dispatcher.
My wife isn't responding to text messages or phone calls.
Okay.
We've had threats against us. Can I get maybe a wellness check at the house? We have both been targeted by a stalker.
After going around the house, Officer O'Hara notices the garage door has windows, but they're too high for him to see. The footage then shows him returning to his vehicle before he pulls his car up the driveway, close to the door, so he can use it to climb up. That's when he sees it.
151, send medical, and 110, I need a 4th sentry. Broomfield police! Broomfield police!
Right there, on the floor of the garage, is 44-year-old Kristil Krug, unconscious. She has a head injury, but Officer O'Hara is not sure if she simply fell or if she was attacked.
I'm on CPR. Let me know when the next unit is close. I'll open the garage door, particularly medical.
Outside, Kristil's mother Linda walks up to the house just as Officer O'Hara opens the garage door for the paramedics.
Ma'am, I need you to stay out, please.
I need you to come over here for a minute, okay? So we can work. Can't.
She's okay.
As other family members start arriving, police secure the rest of the house.
Broomfield police, anybody inside, make yourself known. Clear here, coming out. You go one way, I got the other. Clear here. She's got a good head wound. I think it's from falling down. Guys, you see anything other than a fall type of wound?
That's a stab wound.
Police can tell Kristil was attacked getting into or out of her car. She was hit over the head before the person stabbed her.
They rolled out the stretcher and I thought, oh, she's gonna be okay. They're gonna do everything for her. But then they rolled the stretcher back out without her. I knew.
Soon after, a scream is heard coming from down the road. It's Kristil's husband, Dan.
Hey, stay back, stay back.
This is my house. I understand. This is my house.
He's just learned the news that his wife was murdered and runs into the arms of Kristil's family. Dan is in shock. He suddenly goes weak in the knees and can no longer stand on his own.
This man right now has just lost his everything. He's lost his wife, he's lost the mother to his children, and now he has to do everything.
With the killer still at large, Dan is brought in for further questioning. But when Detective Martinez goes to see him, he's in no state to be interviewed.
I arrived at the police department and immediately went to go speak with Dan. When I walked in, he became very emotional.
I know I'm glad to protect her. It's not your fault.
To make things easier for him, Detective Martinez tells Dan that he has people in his team who can help break the news to their children. But Dan insists he wants to be the one to tell them.
What happened to Mommy?
Mommy got hurt.
Is she okay?
No. Mommy's not okay. Mommy's not going to be okay. Mommy? Mommy died.
For now, Detective Martinez is worried about protecting Dan and his 3 kids before the killer claims another victim. Kristil's other family members are also brought in, each put into separate interrogation rooms. But while investigators are hoping to gain any information on the identity of Kristil's stalker, there's one person that holds the key to solving the case: Daniel Krug herself. 1 month before her murder, Kristil makes a phone call to the Broomfield Police Department.
I need to report threatening emails and phone calls from a stalking ex.
Detective Martinez is the one assigned to her case.
I reached out to Kristil and arranged an interview with her.
Thank you.
When Kristil came in, she just kind of filled the whole room with her presence. You could tell that she was just very intelligent and she was very well prepared.
Okay, hi. Yes, I know. Yes, it's been a little hearing.
When she sits down to talk with Detective Martinez, Kristil tells him that for the last few weeks, a stalker has been following her around and harassing her online.
It's a lot, and it has definitely made me paranoid everywhere I go, unfortunately. So
No, I can completely understand that.
yeah.
She first and foremost wanted the stalking and the behavior and the contact to stop.
So I have to write this down.
This makes it so much simpler. I'll tell you
Okay, I did a timeline for you.
Kristil has come prepared. She's gathered all the information about the stalking instances onto a spreadsheet.
All I do is oh, we're going to create a stalker log, we're going to monitor this, I'm going to go see what information I can have. I don't know, I just always heard document everything.
The stalker log was detailed and complete and included everything from dates, times, locations, her feelings about it.
The first date on the stalker log is September 23rd, 2023. This is when everything started. On that day, her husband Dan saw an intruder running out of their home.
My husband caught somebody going through our garage, he came home, the garage door was up, and he caught somebody running out of our garage.
When the officer shows up at the house, Dan is already waiting outside in the middle of his driveway.
I'm Officer Chauncey. I'm Dan. Nice to meet you.
He explains to the officer that he saw the intruder when he got back home that afternoon.
As I came down, the door was open. I saw someone, I think it was a guy, but it was so fast.
Yeah.
Blue jeans, gray shirt, run out, jump over my gate, and take off that way. I cared less about following him than getting inside and checking on my kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
We realized the spare key that we keep in the garage isn't there.
Okay. Where was that kept at?
Toolbox. Everything seems to be there.
Okay.
Except a spare key.
The house key. Okay. Got it.
Kind of went over
this
here.
area. Okay.
I went that way.
Patrol officers responded, checked the area, and they couldn't find anybody that matched the description that Dan said.
When Kristil learns about the incident, she's more annoyed than afraid.
My daughter, she said Dan left the garage door open. She was very angry.
I watched the garage door closing, not necessarily closed.
Sure. I don't think she thought there was danger.
She didn't see it as a real threat.
Dan takes care of changing the locks, so there no longer seems to be anything to worry about. Just a few days later, on October 2nd, Kristil receives a strange text from a number she doesn't recognize. It reads, "Hi Kristil, it's Anthony. Hope it's okay I looked you up. I go to Boulder every few weeks and thought we could hook up. You game?"
And the only Anthony she knew of was Jack Anthony Holland.
Kristil's log details her relationship with Anthony over the years, starting in 1999 when she graduated high school.
We dated summer of 99, very briefly.
He was a very nice guy. He was fun. We liked him. Everybody liked Anthony.
But the relationship didn't last for more than a year, probably.
Their life goals and ambitions were two completely different tracks.
I was going to college. I was like on an engineering track. There was just total different lifestyle choices. I broke it off with him, and we ended fairly amicably.
About a year later, while studying to get her degree in chemical engineering, Kristil met Dan.
I remember when Dan came over and my mom and I were there and he was looking for my dad. And that's when it kind of hit me like, oh, this is real. This is going to be the guy. I was happy at the time because I knew she was going to be really happy.
In the years that followed, while Kristil was building her life with Dan, Anthony would still reach out from time to time on social media.
Anthony had tried to contact Kristil a number of times over the years to kind of rekindle their romance. Every time she rejected him.
Here, he says, let's get together. I'm like, no. Here he says, let's get together. I'm like, I have a serious boyfriend. Like, we were living together at this time. And he's like, screw your boyfriend. And then, I got married in 2007. He's reaching out to me. He can see I have a kid. This is my profile picture of, like, my kid. He's like, we're meant to be together. And I'm like, well, I'm married, happily married with children. You need to stop. And he got, like, real emotional. It wasn't angry, but it was hurt and real, like, over-the-top emotions. And then blocked me. And I'm like, good. I shut down Facebook entirely before the pandemic. So, like, there was no way to get a hold of me on any kind of old email address or old way, and that's when this starts.
So when Kristil gets a text from Anthony in October of 2023, she doesn't reply. The next day, she receives a more disturbing message. "You should say yes when I offer pity. Whatever. Saw your pics. You got fat. Bet your loser husband won't your fat." Kristil is shocked. This doesn't sound like the Anthony she knows.
He's never said this kind of stuff to me before, so it's like something's really wrong here. Back in the day, harmless. Now, I have no idea what this is. I don't know this person anymore. So I just see him as pretty unstable, honestly.
Kristil doesn't answer, hoping things will just blow over. And if this is in fact Anthony, he'll get the hint and leave her alone. But she has no idea that her nightmare is only just beginning.
I got a really strange text message from somebody saying, are you still looking for men? And I was like, okay, I don't think this is Anthony. But
She's receiving numerous text messages from all sorts of different unknown numbers. All of men, many of which are sending photos of themselves in sexually explicit poses.
After researching online, Kristil discovers a classified ad with her name and phone number on it. The ad solicits men to send her obscene photos of themselves. Kristil is convinced someone posted the ad to torment her, but she can't be sure if Anthony is behind this. Whoever it was, this bizarre incident is causing tension between her and Dan.
They weren't as connected and with each other as much as before.
They were constantly arguing.
Then, on October 31st, almost a month after those first text messages, she gets an email with a picture of her husband. It was taken at his work without him knowing. The email was sent by ahollandkicks@gmail.com.
Whoever was sending this email was actively following Dan.
The message comes with a threat against Dan. It reads, "This your husband? Can't believe you want to his but not mine. He needs to drive safe. Don't want a clear rubber hose in his tailpipe."
This now is escalating. This is not just threats against me, it's threats against my husband. My husband has a camera in his car. He did not see anybody. Sure. And then unfortunately lost all the video because he didn't save it. So I don't have any video evidence.
Kristil now has a clear indication that she and her family are being followed, and she's terrified. But the thing that bothers her the most is she never thought her ex-boyfriend Anthony Holland would be capable of doing something like this.
There was nothing in the relationship other than him being like stupid with stuff that was ever violent. We argued, but never like in a violent way.
When her parents come to visit her that weekend, Kristil doesn't hide what's been happening.
I need to let you know I'm being stalked. I'm getting emails from Anthony. He's threatening me with things. He's saying just bizarre things.
She had called me to ask if I could help her get a restraining order, and kind of what that process would look like and what she needed to do to get her ducks in a row.
Kristil has already hired a private investigator to find Anthony so she can serve him the restraining order, but tracking him down proves to be much harder than expected.
He moves everywhere. He's like all over the place.
Temporary protection order was what she was going to seek, which would require him to be served with paperwork in person.
Because I don't have an address, I can't submit that civil protection order. And there are tons of addresses. He moves everywhere and between like 3 different states.
Dan installs security cameras on their house and both buy dash cams for their car in case Anthony follows them while they're driving. First and foremost, Kristil is worried for the safety of her children and her husband Dan, so she starts carrying a Sig Sauer 9mm.
She felt she had to get a gun. My heart just sunk.
She had a concealed carry purse specifically designed for that gun.
I do have weapons in my home. I am intending to register for a course here to relearn. It's been a long time since I've shot my guns, but to relearn and get familiarized with my handgun.
And I do remember going out to the gun range with her, and she just sat in the parking lot and cried, and she was just so upset. All I could do was hug her.
With everything that's happened, Kristil's children have started to notice that their mother is upset. She now has to explain to them what's been going on.
I want them to also know that they can stand up for themselves in situations that might be threatening.
So she was telling them all about what they needed to do if an intruder came in.
My oldest said, she's like, I'm glad that you told me something. She's like, because this is making me, she's like, it was making me feel worse when I've just heard you guys talking in hushed tones.
Kristil is doing her best to keep their lives as normal as possible. She makes sure her oldest daughter can focus on her dance classes instead of worrying about her mommy's stalker.
She was so active in all of her daughter's performances and would be backstage and would be like a mom backstage helping all the little dancers get out to the stage on time. And
with Christmas just around the corner, Kristil's daughter will be performing in 2 productions of The Nutcracker, something she's been looking forward to the whole year. But because of what's been going on, and because no one knows where the stalker is, Kristil is asked by the artistic director and the company to stop volunteering and to stay away from her daughter's performances.
It was devastating to her.
I think a lot of this is the trying intentionally to scare me, as opposed to actually trying to approach me. But my fear is, when does that switch happen, where he suddenly gets emboldened because I'm not responding?
When Kristil leaves that day, I'm believing that this is a very real issue, and there are credible threats, and we need to get on top of this quickly.
The first thing Detective Martinez wants to do is confirm the identity of the stalker. He serves search warrants to Verizon, TextNow, and Google. Their records could prove that Anthony Holland is in fact the one behind these threats.
When we serve a search warrant to any major company, it takes time. Weeks, if not months, for some companies. It would be, I think, foolish of any detective to go talk to somebody that they don't even know that is actually the person.
If I get involved too early and start trying to be like, hey, knock it off, this isn't okay, it usually throws fuel on the fire and kind of emboldens, because look at me, this cop...
I'm getting no consequence.
Right, this cop came to me and I had no consequence. He just told me to knock it off. Like, what'd you do, you know? Like,
yeah.
November 9th, just 2 days after her meeting with Detective Martinez, Kristil receives another text message that only makes things worse. It reads, "Saw you at dentist, you got so in my car, so I on yours. See you soon."
Alluding to the person being outside in their own car watching Kristil.
Kristil immediately notifies Detective Martinez, who sends an officer over to her house.
Kristil, how's it, Andrew?
Yeah, nice to
Very
meet
good
you.
to meet you. I talked to you.
That "saw you at the dentist" text has gotten Kristil worried her stalker might have put a tracker on her car.
Okay. I can only assume a tracker, based on the fact that he could show up there, and I don't see vehicles unless he's like stationed out like on corners. He doesn't have the street to know what we need.
We put Kristil's car on a lift. We checked that car top to bottom, front to back, and we couldn't find anything on her car.
I'm live streaming my location all the time to my brother.
Okay.
So that he knows anytime I'm in the house also. So, like, everyone knows where I'm going to be from now on.
Okay.
I arranged for some undercover officers to follow her around, kind of to sit outside of her home to see if there was any weird cars or anything like that. We weren't able to identify anybody.
The constant paranoia is taking a toll on Kristil, causing more strife in her relationship. She and Dan have been fighting more and more, to the point where Kristil tells her parents they're headed for divorce. And then more texts come in, making it clear what Anthony is planning next and who he's aiming for. "I'll get rid of him, and then we can be together. So easy. Give me the signal, and he won't come home."
It was a direct threat towards Dan. Basically implies that they belong together and that he will make Dan disappear.
Dan?
So Dan also comes in to talk to Detective Martinez.
I just wanted to sit down with you and kind of, one, see how you're doing. I don't know where to start with that open-ended question. Largely being paranoid for the last few days. My panic level has gone considerably higher. I have a retractable asp steel baton, pepper gel spray, always in this pocket. I went to the grocery store briefly on Tuesday, and someone behind me dropped a can. I panicked. So what am I doing? I'm panicking. And I'm doing a job of protecting my wife.
Interacting with Dan that day, I felt that Kristil was better equipped to defend herself than Dan was to defend Kristil.
The anxiety has become unbearable, and Kristil fears she won't be able to prevent the worst from happening, that sooner or later, someone will get killed.
He will never stop. He will never stop.
But what she fears the most is that her children will get hurt, and she can't let that happen.
I don't think she was sleeping.
She was just exhausted. I've never seen my daughter like that before.
We had conversation almost daily throughout the month of November about where she was, how she was doing, and she basically refused to leave her house because that's where she felt most safe.
On December 13th, the last day before her murder, the dashcam in Kristil's car catches a rare glimpse into her life. Instead of showing her stalker following her car, the footage only shows how exhausted she's become and how the last 3 months have visibly worn her down. Thursday, December 14th. The security cameras around the Krug residence show the activity that morning. At 6:45 a.m., Dan drives their eldest to the bus stop before returning minutes later, just before 7. At 7:42 a.m., Kristil is seen driving away as she takes their younger 2 kids to school. She returns just before 8. At 8:24 a.m., Dan pulls out, heading off to work about a half hour away. Dan is on the road when at 8:56 he receives a text from Kristil asking him to pick up their daughter after school because she has a meeting with Detective Martinez. Dan responds when he arrives at the office 20 minutes later. "Sure thing. FYI, I forgot my chicken on the counter. Please put it in the fridge." But Kristil doesn't message back, which has Dan worried. He tries calling her, but gets no answer. For the next 3 hours, he keeps trying to reach her until at 12:01 p.m., Dan asks for that welfare check. He also calls Kristil's mother, who lives close by.
Dan said, "I can't find Kristil." I thought, oh, she's probably just not answering her phone. Let me go over and I'll find out what's going on.
When Kristil's mother, Linda, arrives at the house, she walks up the driveway.
Female has some sort of head wound. She is warm.
As the garage door opens, she peeks inside.
Ma'am, I need you to stay out, please.
I need you to come over here for a minute, okay, so we can work. Can.
She's okay.
I was running towards the house, and I said, "That's my daughter."
Oh, God. She's gone. She's gone.
Linda was standing right there and said, "She's dead. They killed her."
Kristil's family is completely distraught. When Dan arrives, he breaks down crying, held close in their arms. With the killer still at large, detectives begin combing through the crime scene while others start looking for the suspect.
We started canvassing the neighborhood. Detectives were assigned to track down Jack Anthony Holland, who was our prime suspect. Dan was potentially the next victim.
They haven't been able to locate Anthony in the last few months, but what they do have is a license plate attached to his name. Police put out a nationwide alert to be on the lookout for his vehicle. Almost immediately, they get a hit. Only, it's not on any roads leading out of Colorado, but in north-central Utah. Investigators contact authorities there.
We made the joint decision to go make contact at the residence.
Multiple deputies in Utah zero in on Anthony's vehicle, parked outside a residence. They have a warrant for Anthony's arrest on stalking charges.
Mr. Holland answers the door. We introduce ourselves. We ask him who he is. He introduces himself as Mr. Holland.
The most shocking thing is that Anthony is already home just a couple hours after the murder. Anthony invites the officers inside, waiting to be told what all this is about.
You can stay seated. Stay seated.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the name Kristil Krug? She may have been Grimsrod when you knew her.
Yeah.
And do you know a Daniel Krug?
No.
No? How do you know Kristil?
She was an ex-girlfriend.
She's an ex-girlfriend? How long's the ex? Like how long ago?
1999.
Oh, so like a long while ago.
She was my very first girlfriend ever.
Oh, okay.
The deputies go through the events of Anthony's morning. Apparently, he had been shopping for clothes at a store in American Fork, just 10 miles outside Salt Lake City. He shows them the receipt from his purchase, and the officers are able to confirm Anthony is telling the truth.
There was a lot of police officers. I'm like, geez, I must be in trouble. I had no idea what was going on. They asked me if I knew Kristil Krug, and I said, yes, I know her. She was very smart, which I really looked up to. The breakup was hard on both of us. We both held each other and just cried when we broke up. I haven't cried that hard until my mom died. And we became friends on Facebook.
The strange thing is, Anthony admits to having texted Kristil after their split, but says the last time he messaged her was in 2016.
I got a little drunk and I left her a message saying that I apologized to her for all the things that I did when we were together, and then she stopped talking to me. I was done. It was over.
Colorado police are now left without any legal basis to arrest Anthony. They have no proof he was Kristil's stalker or her killer, as he was provably 500 miles away at the time of the murder. Detectives might have lost their prime suspect, but with a murder on their hands, they can now escalate those search warrants. Martinez has been waiting nearly a month for the digital information that would tell him where those stalking messages came from. But now, almost immediately, the companies respond, and what he discovers in the data is shocking.
I felt like I was looking at the wrong person the whole time.
Go, 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 go. Just go. Park. Go, 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 go. Park. Show your hands! Show your hands!
Hands on your face! Hands on your face!
You guys have a hospital?
Hey, Dan. You want me to tell your kids that you killed their mother, or do you want somebody else to?
Dan Krug is arrested for the murder of his wife, Kristil. He was pulled over on his way to their daughter's performance of the Nutcracker. The data provided by Verizon, TextNow, and Google showed that the stalker had been using the Wi-Fi at Dan Krug's office.
The email that was used, the phone number that was used, all of those things are coming back to one place, and that's Dan's work.
The burner phone first used to text Kristil was traced back to a store in Broomfield, and it had been purchased using a gift card registered to Dan Krug.
The day before the homicide, Dan had searched a number of different things related to head trauma, how hard you have to hit someone for them to be unconscious, how long someone needs to be unconscious to become brain dead, all a variety of those kinds of searches.
Police also did a digital analysis of that photo of Dan outside his office. It showed the photo had been taken in selfie mode with a timer. But what about the text message sent from Kristil's phone at the time Dan was arriving at work? Investigators found out that the text was scheduled to be sent after he had already left the house.
Dan was building his alibi, that he's going to get this text message saying, hey, I got a text from her while she had been alive. I got this text from her.
In looking back at his work camera, he took very specific routes at his work so that he was seen on camera.
He receives the text message he sent himself. He starts trying to communicate back with Kristil. He doesn't want to be the one to find the body, so he calls the non-emergency line at the Broomfield Police Department and asks for a welfare check.
He wanted an alibi, obviously. Why did it have to be me?
As it turns out, not everyone was surprised to discover Dan had killed his wife. Just hours after Kristil's death, her mother Linda tells detectives that maybe Anthony isn't the only suspect they should look at.
Her life was hell when slept for months and last year. Her husband and her were not in good terms. She told me that her marriage was over. Here in the last few months, she just loathed him. I kept thinking, why are you staying? Did she go?
I remember hugging Linda, and I don't know why it came out, but I remember just saying, like, did he kill her? Like, did Dan kill her? And I remember Linda telling me, like, I don't know.
I can't shake this question. Is he the one that's been doing this with Anthony?
But the most shocking statement comes from Donna, Kristil's stepmother.
This never goes from here, right? She did say something that to me on Monday that was alarming. She did say that she felt like she couldn't even rule Dan out at that point. I don't know what she meant. I don't know.
It appears Kristil was about to discover that Dan was her stalker all along, and it's possible that Dan decided to kill her before she found out the truth. April 4th, 2025, Dan Krug pleads not guilty to first-degree murder and stalking.
The very, very first hearing, Dan walked in the room and made eye contact with all of us and smiled. I think he thought we were there for him.
Apparently, the look on my face, after he saw me, he never looked at me again. Ever.
While all the digital information points to Dan, the physical evidence against him is thin. If Dan Krug walks free, he will have full custody of Kristil's children, and their lives will be in danger. But there's one witness that will change everything. One of Dan's ex-girlfriends. To this day, she's still terrified of him. So much so that she asked to remain anonymous.
It made me feel watched. So I was just constantly on guard.
She says that after she broke up with him, she began receiving disturbing messages and phone calls from someone she did not know.
I started to get these really disturbing phone calls. Here I was being called like a whore and a slut and things like that. And that's when it got scary for me.
When we heard her full testimony, it was just so shocking because it was exactly mirror to our daughter.
At the time, the messages were investigated by police and traced back to Dan's college on the East Coast. The woman got a temporary restraining order against him, but he was never charged with any crime. Until now. After 7 days of testimony, the jury in Kristil Krug's murder case is asked to deliberate. When the jury returns with a verdict, Kristil's parents are holding their breath.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree.
A jury returned a guilty verdict in the trial of a Broomfield man accused of killing his wife. Daniel Krug is found guilty of first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation.
Today, the court sentenced Mr. Krug to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a just and appropriate sentence for a horrific crime.
Dan Krug thought he could fool everyone and get away with his crimes. He just never thought Kristil would outsmart him. It was her efforts that helped police solve her own murder and put a monster behind bars. At the cost of her own life, she made sure her children will always be safe.
She loved them, she wanted to protect them, and she wanted them to be happy.
Now, with their mother gone and their father in prison, Kristil's children live with her parents.
We want to protect them. They're very surrounded by their mother's family's love.
They're in a loving environment. They're given everything that Kristil would have given them.
It's only been 2 years since her death, and for her parents, the pain is still hard to bear. But they do all they can to make sure Kristil's memory lives on with her children.
Every day is a difficult day. You wake up and you feel the pain. And then I look at my grandkids and I find a moment of peace because I see her.